Got Clutter, Get Organized, the conversation. I always get excited whenever I do these because today we have Rachel Arbuckle of 2000 Paces Photo Organizing. I can't wait to dive into this conversation because Rachel, actually, one summer I spent organizing all my mother's photos, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh,
So, welcome to the podcast.
thank you so much, Janet. It's such an honor to be in the presence of a woman who is so strong and organized and wants to help people. I love to surround myself with women just like you, and I imagine the people listening are either the same or striving for the same. So, honor to be here.
So, Rachel, before we get started and just, really talking about how people can really not only preserve but organize their photos, what made you decide to start this business?
Sure. Great question, because some people aren't even aware that a business like this exists. They don't even know that they can outsource to an expert to help them. Um, I had no grand plans to start a company. The I worked in corporate America doing the 9 to 5. Not passionate, but paying the bills and content enough, if you will. And I live in Southern California where fires are prevalent. And there was a particular fire that we had no notice. Normally, you've got hours to evacuate and things like that. We didn't have any notice, and I had minutes to grab what I could. And of course, your family and your pets are priority. And then we tried to grab a computer and a couple scrapbooks. But inevitably, we had my grandfather's World War II memorabilia, my kids' photos and artwork and report cards and photos of my parents. And I happen to be what I call the memory keeper of my family. And I imagine, Janet, you can relate to that, right? There's always one of us that somehow, whether we want to or not, inherits everything. So I felt this tremendous responsibility. And I looked up at this fire, and we were evacuated for 6 or 7 days. And I looked up and thought, oh my gosh, we're going to lose all these memories that are absolutely irreplaceable. And I was devastated, and it caused me so much anxiety. And I looked over at my husband, and I still get chills to this day thinking about it because it was such a profound moment in my life. And I looked at him and said, excuse me. I looked at him and said, we need to find a solution to get these protected if our photos survived. And they did. We had some smoke damage, but the winds shifted. We were very lucky. Some people in our community, of course, were not as lucky. And I started looking for a solution, and I, at the time, didn't find one that I thought our photos deserved. So I created a solution.
Excuse me, that is wonderful because my story is that my mother was a photographer, but she also actually developed her photos.
Your kid, she
So
had
I
her own dark room.
Yeah, so she had photos from probably before 1923, from when she was born, up until, of course, when I was born and after.
Yeah.
So when she passed away, I got those bins. It was just bins. And
Yeah.
it was a little overwhelming even for me, and I kept putting it off, which is why I really wanted to have this conversation with you because it can be overwhelming just not only trying to organize them, but also preserve them. So I really wanted you to first talk about some of the things that, when it comes to photos, what we possibly should not be doing in
Right.
regards to keeping them or storing them or hiding them, all of those things.
Yeah. The list can be very long depending on what your goals are. But since we've only got limited time, I'll try and highlight some things. A couple things are it's really my goal for our clients when we work on a project is number one, preservation, because that's what prompted me to start the business. Let's preserve and protect those memories so that they can be enjoyed for generations. And then my second goal is let's organize them in a way where you can find them. For example, it doesn't do any good to just digitize everything. That takes care of problem one. But how do you find everything if it's just Taylor family one, Taylor family two? So with that in mind, let's talk about preservation. If you aren't ready to tackle your own collection of photos or hire somebody, a couple of things to keep in mind. I would try and avoid keeping them in the garage or the attic or anywhere that has extreme temperature. Extreme heat for sure is going to hurt your photos. And of course, extreme cold, not as much, but it's any kind of moisture. Oftentimes people will store them in their garage, and I realize not everybody has a whole room to dedicate to their photos. So we do what we can, keep them away from the water heater. We have had clients, the water heater burst and the photos got damaged. Also try if you have them near a water source. So let's say that there's a bathtub right, above the ceiling. Those are little things that you should keep in mind. I know it's a lot, but
I'm thinking.
I know, where are my photos? So keeping them in a dry, climate-controlled space is really ideal. Again, I realize that we're all living our lives and you do what you can. If you can put them in some watertight bins until you can get them digitized, that may help. Here in San Diego, we had to worry about fires before, but now we've got floods and hurricanes, which is, unprecedented. And we've had a number of people in San Diego whose photos drifted a mile away because of the floods. Maybe they could have been protected a little bit if they were in watertight bins. Ultimately, getting them digitized should be the goal, because as much as we want to hold on to those precious print photos, if heaven forbid something happened to them and you have them digitized, you can still enjoy them, you can reprint them. So that's, preservation. Home movies as well. I encourage people to get the home movies converted as soon as you can. The old VHS tapes and the mini DVs and all the big cameras we all used to carry around, and we've got boxes of the tapes, you know what I mean? Those unfortunately do deteriorate over time, more so than some other technologies. And so I would encourage people to get that done. We do that here, but if, there's a lot of places that can do that. CDs, DVDs, memory cards, thumb drives. Sometimes people don't think about some of that older digital data. And what I recommend is that at the very least, you transfer that and consolidate it into one external hard drive. That's always our first step. If you're doing it on your own, getting it onto a drive and then getting it onto an online server, even if you're not ready to organize it or you don't know how to tackle it, you've got a backup. Because it's very easy for those CDs and DVDs to get scratched, to get broken, and so on. Let's see. So that's the preservation part of it. Do you
Okay.
want me to touch on some
Okay.
basic organizing or what?
Yes, please, because
Okay,
I'm taking notes, Rich. 'Cause I'm like, okay,
good.
a waterproof bin. Okay,
Yeah,
let's see. Do I have one? I think I have
right.
one. But because like right now, I mean, and I'm thinking organizing, but also decorative. There are these cute little boxes, decorative boxes. I'm like, you know
Yeah,
what? You're moving into a nice little bin. I don't, so
that's right.
thank you for that tip. I do have them on protective paper, but you continue because I'm taking notes here, Rachel.
No, great. I mean, and it does feel overwhelming. And I want to be careful not to throw out so many things that people go, oh my gosh, I've got so many things to do and I'm so overwhelmed that I don't want to get started. So I think it's really important to keep in mind, and I know you talk to your listeners about this, do what you can. Do what you're
Hmm.
capable of doing. So, focusing on that preservation, even again, if it's not organizing it right away, but it's getting it in the bins. If it's not organizing the digital, but it's transferring it and getting it to an online service and making sure it's backed up. The only other comment I'll make about preservation is, those old photo albums, the adhesive ones, right? You
Yes.
pull the plastic back and they're
Yes.
probably very yellow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody that experienced the 60s, 70s, and 80s knows about
Yeah.
those albums. Um, Unfortunately, those, of course, contain chemicals that
Mm.
are deteriorating the photos right now as we're sitting here. And so if you have the opportunity to take them out of those albums, that's the first thing we do is when we get a collection of print items, we get them out of the albums, we get them out of the envelopes, and then you're ready to start organizing them. So that's on the preservation side. On the organizing side, I'll start with print. Um, so really for both, I recommend that, and the way that we organize is chronologically. I know many people think, Well, I've got 4 children, so I wanna separate it by children, by child, and you make sure that when I'm ready to downsize or I, move on to the next chapter, I can hand that off to my kids. But we all know what the problem is. Um, if you've got 4 kids, inevitably there's there's very few photos that only has the one child in it. So now you've got child 3 who has this small stack. They have part of the story. Child 2 has part of the story. Then the question comes, well, what do I do then? How do I get all these photos to them? Organizing your photos chronologically, first of all, is how we live our lives. That's our journey. Our journey is not experienced by, I went to Disneyland, I went on these trips, I had school. It's lived chronologically. So why don't we revisit that story in the way that we lived it? Then what you can do is, now you've got the chronological stories, you can go back to remember the date. But with the digital age now, we can use facial recognition and keywords. So you've got this organized, digitized set of photos, but then you can type in, for example, I have 2 children, Darian and Isaiah, and I can type both of their names in and find every photo in which the 2 of them are in. I can type my mom's name and find photos that the 3 of them are in. And now I've got this beautiful gift to give to my mom for Mother's Day. The point is that you organize in the way you lived your life, and then you add these keywords so you can kind of magically pull out what you need when you need
Hmm,
it.
I like
It's a
that.
fun little trick. I'm amazed how many people come to us and say, you know what, I've spent hours trying to organize these photos, and I would put all the dance recitals here and all the sports here and all the trips here. And our brain thinks that way. Our brain thinks kind of like, those old file cabinets, right? And you'd have the file cabinet and you'd pull one drawer open and it would say 1990s. And then in a folder, it would 1991 and then January. That's how we used to gather things. We don't need to do it that way anymore, but it's tough for our minds to kind of wrap around this new way to do it. What I want to encourage you to do is sort of type whatever you want and let that magically fly out of that digital file cabinet.
I love that. And my mother probably started that, Rachel, because she dated all her photos, which was
Oh,
wonderful for me. But also what I did, because she was one of 10 children.
oh
So
my goodness.
I did it like by child. So each of my aunts and my uncles, so I separated them. And
Good.
then because she had so many pictures of my cousins, so then I started matching the cousins to their parents.
Right,
And then I just started actually giving them the pictures, because I
right,
said the only pictures I really value is those of my mother. I
right,
do not value your picture of you at Easter when you were 3 and now
right,
you're like 6, 7. I just and a
right.
grandfather. I don't, so,
Yeah.
but I like that chronological. Oh my goodness, you're just giving so many little tips
You know
here.
what though,
Really
Janet,
good.
you just brought up a really great point. As much as I want to encourage people to organize their entire collection, and I'll give a couple other tips as well, it's okay, and I'm sure you talk about this too. I've heard you talk about it. It's okay to let go of some things too that aren't meaningful to you. So if you've got those photos of your 3-year-old cousin, who's now 6, 7, get rid of it or hand it off, to that person. That's okay. I think, you know, particularly as women, we have a lot of guilt when it comes to everything. But when it comes to the photos, I didn't organize it enough. I didn't prepare it for my children. It's my responsibility to take care of everybody else. And I love the fact that you were able to kind of set some boundaries and say, these are the photos that I want to put my attention into.
Because there were
Yeah.
so many photos of my mother. Yeah, I mean, she enjoyed life. It was parties, the beach, this, that, and the
Wow.
other. So I love those photos, and even some of the black and white ones she took.
Oh,
So,
those are
yeah.
the best. Let me ask
Yeah.
you, Janet, were you able to, it sounds like you inherited, like many of us, after we've lost a parent, we inherited their photos, but did you have the opportunity prior to your mom's passing to talk to her about some of the photos and some of the stories behind them?
Oh, Rachel, yes, I did. So,
Yes.
I was trying to help my mother get organized. And
Okay.
I'm going through all this little bin she had of keepsakes, and there was an invitation in there, but the invitation didn't have the last name of any family member. So I was just going, I tossed it, and she's like, "Oh, no, no." She said, that was the wedding that I was in. And then I remember, oh yeah, she had a picture of her in a yellow dress because she was like one of the bridesmaids.
Yeah.
I still have the gloves, not that I
Oh my
wear them, but
goodness.
that, or then there was another picture when she used to work at a college. She's like, oh yes, these are these people. So I did get a lot of that while she was still living, of different people. So there's still a few pictures, and I'm still like, well, who is this child and who does he belong to?
Yeah.
Nobody knows, but
Right.
majority of them I did actually get to talk to her about. So thank you for asking that. But yes, I did.
Good. I mean, I think that's what's really important. We're in this era where we love to organize and put everything in pretty bins and make it accessible. And I love that. Don't get me wrong. I'm the first to sign up. The Container Store is my favorite place to shop, right? Um, but it's really about the stories behind it. And so, unfortunately, we do have clients that come in. Um, and we work with clients all over the country, by the way. So whether they come in or we work with them remotely, uh, and they say, I've lost a parent, I've inherited all this, I don't know what to do. And unfortunately, we start going through the photos and they say the same thing that you originally said with your mom. I don't know who this is, and they feel compelled to get rid of it. And that's okay, that happens. But if you have the opportunity to talk about those stories, write down the stories from the person that experienced it, because there's so much power in that. And we took fewer photos back then, and so each photo really, can have a powerful story. I know, we had a client once who lost her mom and had tucked the photos away and lost her mom at an early age. And of course, had tucked those photos away because it was very emotional. And finally had the courage to open that bin and trusted us. And we were so honored. And we were looking through the photos, and it was so surprising. It was a photo of she and her sister, and they were wearing this flowered dress. And it wasn't, there was nothing behind them. They weren't in a unique situation, but her eyes started to well up with tears. And I said, okay, what's the story here? And she said, I remember that we were on a plane ride. And this is back when you had to dress up to get on the plane.
Oh
And
yeah.
right. And now you see people in leggings and yoga pants, right?
Yes,
Very different.
yes.
But that's a whole nother podcast. But she said, my mom had us put these flower dresses on, and I got really sick and I threw up all over my dress. And she said, when we landed at the airport, all my mom thought was, we need to get you another dress because you need to look nice. And she was laughing about it. And it brought some tears, but tears of joy, because it was a memory. And so those little photos and she said, I had completely forgotten about that until I saw this photo. So I really love that it helps connect us.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And for me, it was looking, I remember one time my mother made a comment because I just love patent leather shoes, boots,
Is that right?
whatever. And she was saying, you like that. So you know what, Rachel? I pulled out the photo album. I said, in every picture of me as a child, what did I have? You bought me a patent leather pocketbook and shoes to match.
Look
And
at
she was
that.
like, oh yeah, you're right. So,
Right.
so they can bring. So,
You put the blame
Rachel,
right on her with proof.
I know. So are there any other tips? And just because, like you said, people they open, whether it's a bin, a box, a closet, a bag,
Yeah.
for them just not to like get so overwhelmed so they just don't want to ever, move forward. Do you have any other tips that you'd like to share? Because you've shared a lot. I've been taking a lot of notes, Rach.
Good, good. I'm so glad. Yeah, a couple tips. I I experienced overwhelm when I first started this company. There's not, unfortunately, a college of photo organizing, and so I spent a couple years trying to research how can I provide this to clients all over the country. And I started with my own photos and my parents' photos, and I still recall that feeling of overwhelm. So what I encourage people to do is when you, first of all, I would get everything in one place, even if you're not ready to tackle it, knowing that you have everything. Because sometimes people will dive into, I'm just going to deal with this box. And they do it and they spend hours and days and months and weeks and so on. And then they find another box that could fill in the blank or had duplicates had they had everything together. So I recommend, if you can, get everything in one place, kind of take an inventory of what you have. And if you have the energy to start tackling it, put it by media type, first of all. So put all the albums together, put all the envelopes together, put all the thumb drives together, and then start tackling it by decade. and start with the ones that you can handle. Sometimes people think, well, I need to start with chronological. I'm just going to start with the first box that's in front of me. Start with what you can get through. Um, Start with the ones that maybe have identifying information. If you inherited things from a parent or a grandparent, maybe like your mom did a wonderful job of documenting dates. So start with those, because inevitably you're going to find some that don't have dates. But I like to say that we're not just photo organizers, we're detectives.
Yes.
So we look at those and do a little detective work and go, well, let's see, so and so had braces in this photo from 1965. This one's not dated, but she has braces there too. So let's kind of assume that that's around the same time. I also find that the overwhelm comes from sitting down and trying to tackle every photo and categorize it. So here's what I recommend is set up, and this is how we do it, is get yourself some photo boxes, get some index cards and a Sharpie, and write the years down. So let's say you're going to tackle the 80s. So write 1980, 1981, etc., right? Put them on, if you have a large table, put them down on the table, or if you have bins, you can set them up in the bins. And then as you're going through the photos and you find a year, simply put it behind the year and try your best. And it's difficult because what do we want to do? We want to take the photo out and go, oh my gosh, I remember this. I need to
Mhm,
send this to my
mhm,
girlfriend from high
mhm,
school, right?
mhm, mhm.
And you've spent hours, and before you know it, you've gotten through 10 photos. Try really hard to just set a goal for yourself. I'm just going to categorize these in a year. When you come across photos and you have no idea what the year is, consider putting in a decade. That's okay. We just want to, it's just like when you try and organize a closet or a kitchen or your digital files, right? You can't get into the minutia. Do what you can. Now, if you come across something and you just say, I have no idea, I need to reach out to a family member, I need to do some more research, no problem. Put it aside in a box for review later. Give yourself some grace.
Mhm.
And so that's how we do it here. And that's how we train all of our team. We have 6 full-time people here at 2000 Paces that are doing exactly that. And we have some pre-printed stuff and, a little more detail. Um, but I think the overwhelm comes when we feel like we have to do everything perfectly in the moment. Um, I'll just, if I may, I love to compare photo organizing to doing a puzzle. Um, we love to talk about puzzles with lots of things.
Mhm.
But when you sit down to do a puzzle, I think unless uh, you've got some strange approach, typically we take all the edge pieces out, right? And we take all the edge pieces out, we separate it, and then we create this framework and we create the edges, and now we have a plan, right? We have an idea of what we're going to do. And so we've got parameters that fall within, a certain boundary. If it doesn't have a
Mhm.
straight edge, we put it to the side.
Mhm.
Well, that's the same as the photos. If it doesn't have a particular year that we know and can identify, we're going to put it to the side. Then we take all the puzzle pieces, and most people will look at them and go, okay, let me separate them by color or shape. There's some kind of a method to that. There's a plan. And so if you've got that plan in mind and you stick with that plan, and by the way, try and enjoy the process, right? I mean, a puzzle is not meant to be frustrating. And if it starts to feel that way, then again, you can seek out professional experts in the field, or you can step away and take a break.
I like that. And you know what I did, Rachel? I did because I had photos probably before 1923 up until after I was born, high school,
Right.
etc. I decided to focus on just the ones that were the oldest because I knew those are the ones that were like you said, they were in the albums. Albums was getting yellow, dingy,
Yeah.
papers falling out. So I decided, so I like that. And that helped me not get overwhelmed because when I looked at all of it, it was like, where do I do? What do I
Right.
start? So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
My God, you've given so many wonderful tips, and I hope everybody watching and listening, share this with somebody. Share it with a family member, share it with a friend, because I know I am actually going to post this interview on the Taylor Facebook family page. Yes, I
Oh,
am.
wonderful.
I know they're probably like, oh, here goes Janet again, but
Right.
we've got photos from the East Coast to the West Coast and all everywhere in between. So, Rachel, one question I do ask all of my guests is, how do you stay organized? Because you're a mom, a wife, businesswoman, probably active in the community. You've got relatives. So how do you just kind of manage it all?
Right. Well, I mean, if there's a secret ingredient or key, I'd love somebody to give that to me, right? I struggle just like everybody
Mm-hmm.
else, but
Mm-hmm.
it is. It's like many of us, and like many women, we're juggling a lot, and so um, taking on organizing for myself, I'm a list person. And I've got so much in my head all the time that can feel overwhelming. So I brain dump. I write everything down when it comes to my mind. I put it in a notebook, and later I categorize it and all that because that's just how my brain works. But I get it out of my head. Um, Here at the office, we employ time blocking. I think time blocking is a fantastic way, and even somebody taking on organizing their own photos. You know what? I'm going to spend 2 hours every Wednesday evening. That's my time block for my photos. And if I can go longer than 2 hours, great. So I think time blocking is great. Setting up some goals, setting up some guidelines. Um, with anything, um, I think it's really good to have a plan and to have a structure, back to the puzzle. But when you're
Mm-hmm.
organizing your photos, that's the same thing. Okay, you know what? I'm going to spend this weekend gathering all of them. That's it. I'm just going to do that. And then the next task is I'm going to write all the inventory, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really having that plan, um, trying to block time for it. And I can't say it enough to give yourself grace because with any kind of organizing, it can feel overwhelming. There's an emotional component and a psychological component, right, to what we do with our closets, with our photos. um, of course, I'm a little biased, but I would argue that the photos bring an extra element.
Mm-hmm.
The emotions, when you look at your mom's in that yellow dress, and you look at those gloves, and you look at the memorabilia and the invitations, and you think back to her telling that story, and you might remember her smile and her laugh, um, and the memories just flood back.
Mm-hmm.
It can be emotional, but it can be healing too. So we've also had clients who unfortunately are experiencing early onset dementia, things like that, and their adult children have gotten photos organized, and they've shown them these photos, and they've seen a glimpse. I mean, it's powerful and it's beautiful, um, but allow yourself to step away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Rachel, I have enjoyed this conversation. And I know you have provided so many wonderful tips and strategies for people just not to get overwhelmed, but also to protect as well as preserve. So, how can listeners and anybody watching connect with you?
Absolutely. So, again, we work with clients all over the country. We are in Southern California. So, our website is 2000paces.com. It's the number 2000, PACES.com. And I'll just let you know, Janet, people say, well, what does that even mean, 2000 paces? And in biblical times, 2000 paces represented a day's journey, and we are trying to capture our clients' journey. So that's where that comes from. So we're always focused on the journey, and the journey is ongoing. So 2000paces.com. Of course, we're on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn. And we do offer free phone consultations. So if you're thinking, I'm not sure if I want to do this on my own, if I want some help, or maybe a hybrid of the two. And I do almost every phone consultation myself whenever I can because I love talking to people to help them. So if you just want to um, get an idea of what you want to do with your photos and where your journey's going, we do have that link on our website.
And of course, I will have links so you can connect with 2000 Paces directly, whether it's via social media or their website. So, Rachel, again, thank you so much for your time today. It has truly been an enjoyable conversation.
Thank you, Janet. And I would love to see the photos of your mom sometime. Thanks.